Well, look, human beings are really, really good at some things. Like, we really are. And we are really bad at some other things, you know? Like, the way that our brains are built, and it makes total sense when you think about the kind of natural evolution of our ancestors, is that we are specifically built for certain jobs. But what we are not built to do is to analyze billions of data points and try and break down this word culture into these community networks. And we can debate AI all day long. The one thing that AI is always going to be able to do that human beings just will not be able to do is basically measure what I would call network effects. So by network effects, if you go to Silicon Valley now and you go to Sequoia Capital or Andreessen Horowitz or any of the biggest VC firms in the world, and you tell them that you've got a product, the first thing they're going to say is, okay, show us the network effects of that product. What that means is, how can you build, defend, activate networks using this? Uber is a network, obviously, right? It's very clearly a network. Airbnb is a network. Google and Facebook and Microsoft, they're all networks, right? That's how they're built. And so I've been really, really interested for the past 7 years in using artificial intelligence to try and become conscious of other life, to try and measure these networks. Because if the other reason is that when you talk about culture, it's quite a difficult word because everyone's got a different distinction for what that means. You talk about community, great, but what am I supposed to do? Just go on Reddit and find all these subreddits and be like, right? We know it's a thing, but the reason we go back to demographics all the time is because we're like, yeah, but how do I do the other thing? And I've invested in or brought in different AI businesses that can do this, right? And what they do is fascinating because I think when another point of sanity is when you realize that when you're dealing with words like culture or community, it's all very kind of artistic, it's very right brain, You need to turn this thing into left brain. You need to be able to see these things as networks because a network has properties. Like you can look at the velocity growth rate of a network, right? And I'm not saying you can predict the future, but I can tell you this, if a network is doubling every 48 hours in size, it doesn't matter how small it is now, it's going to be big soon, right? And that's what COVID taught us. The analysis of COVID was networks. We went, oh my God, these many people on this plane have COVID. 3 of them are now been diagnosed. But if 1 day later, 12 of them have been diagnosed, that's a problem, right? That's an exponential velocity growth rate. So basically, what's amazing about networks is, number one, they have properties. They're mathematical and scientific. Number two, those properties allow you to not only measure where they are, but you can also start to predict where they may be given their velocity growth rate in 6 days, 6 months, right? And then you start to be able to go okay, now we're able to see that this thing may go from being niche to being very, very, very mass quite soon. If it maintains even, you should be able to say, and I'm always obsessed with this idea of digital twins. So this idea that let's say CBD oil, right? Let's say CBD infused beauty products, right? That network is growing at this percentage. I want to look back at previous networks and say, okay, how does that compare to craft beer in 1999, right? And if I start seeing that, oh my God, the inflection point is that this is now bigger than the growth rate of craft beer was in 1999, it's starting to look like something you should pay attention to, right? And this is what happens. Brands constantly, because they don't have the capability to do this. And honestly, they haven't even got the awareness to know that they need that capability. And so I would say that the most sanity-inducing thing, that I can think of is finding partners, and I've got my favorites, but there are many that can help you understand this thing, this culture thing, at a scientific left brain network analysis level. Because then your job is to find the networks that strategically connect with your brand, that have the most power in them, invisible power, right? That's what strategy is. And then find ways to bring them into your brand, or essentially perform an equity swap, whereby you end up with them as part of your story and they end up with you as part of their story. And that is so powerful. If brands can figure that out, and AI allows us to do this. This is about trying to use artificial intelligence to measure cultural networks and community networks to figure out which ones you should be playing with and which ones you should be paying much more attention to. I am wearing a Lululemon top right now, so I'm remembering something that we did for them in 2018. They came to us, and basically the brief was, we're an expensive yoga brand for, how do I put this? Like upper middle class ladies who can afford us, right? We've got a high price point. And that's not really proving very good with Gen Z because they don't have as much money. But kind of also, we've kind of backed ourselves into a bit of a corner. It was very necessary for Lululemon to find some new communities to be associated with, right? Because their associations were, that mean, I mean, it literally said in the brief, and I mean, these are not my words, right? But it literally said in the brief, we are now associated with the lady who sends the wine back 3 times because she doesn't think it's good. Do you know what I mean? So it's becoming that kind of entitled upper middle class. And so how could they break out of this? What we did was we used a community analysis tool, network analysis AI, called Codec, the community-driven economy. That's the business, Codec.ai. And we did a workshop with Lululemon. It was actually fascinating, and they were lovely, amazing humans, really. And we learned a lot from that, because I kind of went in thinking, yeah, yoga's, honestly, I was like, yeah, yoga's kind of stretching, And as we did the workshop, it like hit me like a ton of bricks that like yoga is a thousands of years old spiritual tradition that is so deep, it gives you goosebumps when you start to realize how powerful and amazing it is. It is not stretching, right? So we were like, okay, let's take the principles of yoga. And I mean yoga, not working out, not getting the sweat on, not limbering up, yoga, right? Because that is what the brand truly can own. And in a competitive situation where you've got Nike and Adidas and Sweaty Betty all coming in, somebody had to go and say, the job to be done was get less white and middle class and remind people that yoga is something really deep and amazing. And so what we did was we took the original mission statement of Lululemon that was actually written by the couple that started the brand. And the first words of it, I remember, it gave me goosebumps reading it. It said, breathing and flow leads to a more compassionate existence. And I thought to myself, that's so different from what so many people think of as yoga. It's totally different. And so we kind of, I remember saying to the CMO at the time, if we go here, we are now trying to create the Nike of the spirit. We are not trying to compete with anyone. We are doing the thing that only we could ever do. And I would say, if you're a brand, listen to this, there is always something that only you could ever do. But the reason why brands don't do it is because they think it's too niche. But if you do it well, it's not. And then you get to earn this place in culture as an icon of something that becomes a heuristic and a shortcut for a big, deep idea. And so with Lululemon, we basically used artificial intelligence to listen across community networks to become conscious of other life. And I dare say it was quite an exciting thing for the people that worked at Lululemon. So then we started saying, okay, so let's find these consumers in Gen Z. Let's reposition you so that you're less white and middle class, right? So let's take the words of that manifesto. Breathing and flow leads to a more compassionate and non-violent existence, right? It goes on a bit further, so let's take breathing and flow. So we start listening across networks in culture. We're looking for sizable networks where concepts like breathing and flow or similar word clouds come up very regularly. And ideally, these networks will be networks that we can reposition the brand with, not at, with, in order to make it less white middle class, right? And I remember the first couple of networks that started coming back. Scuba divers, no, another white middle class network, right? And I literally will never forget the moment when the team at Kodak came back and said, "You're not going to believe this. Breathing and flow is coming up well over 100,000 times a day in conversations in the hip hop community." Because, and I can't pull this off because I'm an aging white person, if you're a sick rapper, it's because you've got sick flow. People say, Busta Rhymes got sick flow, right? So now you have a bridge, and this is a rope bridge. It's not a 5-lane highway, right? It's a rope bridge that you have to respect. It's such a tightrope. But if you just walk on that thin line between the truth of your brand and the truth of that community, and in that example, Lululemon could not go to the hip hop community and be like, "Yo, hey guy, hello fellow kids," They had to speak only about breathing and flow. And if you go across that bridge with respect for the community, understanding who they are and what they need, and you have the deep intention to contribute at a certain level of contribution, you become unignorable. That's the thing. The only way in a world that we live in today where the war is for attention, the only way to become unignorable is to add so much value that people go, whoa, right? Yeah. So we walked that very thin line, that very thin bridge into the hip hop community. Yeah, sure, we brought certain influencers with us, but we were really careful to make sure that they were influencers that weren't, oh, they've got Jay-Z, Yeah. It was like in the UK, it was someone totally different from who it was in France, who it was in Germany, who it was, So in the UK, for example, we had P Money. Probably won't be known to anyone outside of the UK, but P Money is the fastest grime rapper in the world, right? He is absolutely sick. And this is what I mean about being lucky, right? Guess what happens when you start looking in the right places for things instead of the wrong places? You get lucky, right? It's like, well, now you're looking in the right place. And then I remember we went to P Money's agent and said, would P Money be interested in potentially being part of this? And they were like, he's obsessed with yoga, right? And we were like, no. It was like, yeah, he's like, his mum's a yoga teacher. He's been like literally brought up with yoga. He's obsessed. And he credits yoga for his ability to rap at 248 words a minute because his breathing is what allows him to do that. So, and most people, again, would be like, oh, you were lucky. Right, well, the more we practice this, the luckier we seem to get, right? And so, and then, then that was the first community that we went into. And we had in the TV ad, we had Busta Rhymes, who is even faster, right, as a rapper. And literally we had Busta in the booth and it was noisy and chaotic. And what you realize is that when Busta Rhymes starts to get up to a certain speed, he closes his eyes in front of the mic in the booth. And what we did was we completely drained all the sound out of and just brought this kind of hum. And what you realize is, you're looking at something that looks really frenetic, but on the inside, he is in a state of absolute flow, right? And that was just a small little cut down. And all it would just say was Flow, Lululemon. And suddenly the hip hop community started going, I get it. This is what we are about. So we weren't showing downward facing dog or incense or sun salutations. We were taking yoga off the mat and into networks and culture. Did it perform? Fuck yeah. It absolutely exploded, right? It doubled the brand in like 7 months, right? And that's just one of the 7 communities we took, you know? I won't bore you with the rest, but like physical meditation is one of the principles of yoga, right? It is meditative, but it is physical meditation. So we went after the arts and crafts community because arts and crafts, you'll be surprised to know, if you knit your own jumper, it's actually not because you can't afford a jumper, right? It's because you enjoy the physical meditation of knitting. So we were saying to people who do things with arts and crafts, someone who makes a pot, it's not because they can't afford to go and buy a pot. They want to go to a pottery class because it's a physical form of meditation to sit and make a pot. And so we could go to them and say, hey, you know that physical meditation thing you're into? It's kind of like yoga. And we did this with 7 different communities. We went to the martial arts community, the UFC community, and started saying, you guys are not about violence, you're about non-violence. And that's yoga. And the opportunity to do that with your brand, I don't know who you are on the other side of the screen, but trust me, the opportunity to do that is huge. Just figure out who you are. What's the spinal column? The spinal column of your brand. What are the immortal truths of that? Go back to the beginning and then use artificial intelligence to find networks that do exist. They're not a product of your marketing director's imagination. They are real and they live and they are looking for contribution. And find the right rope bridge and walk it and contribute so much value on the other side that network activates on your behalf. And you'll find that you end up doing an equity swap. They get you and you get them. And it's a totally different way of thinking, but that will go down, honestly, as a kind of a Harvard, business case study for the years to come, I hope.